while we are in a virtual world, we still are on the unceded land of the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Mississauga Credit, who never ceded this land. And this work that we do is in solidarity and of the 500 years of oppression that that our First Nations people have gone through, which mirrors the 500 years of colonialism that has been suffered by Black and brown folk here in North America, as witnessed through the kindergarten to prison pipeline. So as your host today, my name is Nigel Bariffe. I am a school teacher with the Toronto District School Board. I've taught every grade except for kindergarten, which I'm actually looking forward to teaching because I've got a 4-year-old and I just so amazed of how quickly that learning happens, and it's just such a joy. But today our guest here today is Dr. Enid Lee. She's an anti-racist professional development specialist, leadership coach, and writer. She consults internationally on equitable education and supports educators in preparing all students to create and experience a world with greater justice, joy, and generosity. She's also the author of the groundbreaking Letters to Marcia, A Teacher's Guide to Anti-Racist Education. In a recent letter, Lee observed that COVID-19 is providing a comprehensive lesson in equity and social justice, or the lack thereof. Today, we have the pleasure of joining Dr. Lee in a conversation as we explore for lessons for community, families, teachers, and students, with particular reflections on communities of African ancestry. Throughout the call, we're also going to be having folks join us. You can see Danielle Noel, another fellow teacher from Jack Minor, woo-woo, Scarborough, grade 7-8 teacher, will also be joining us in having a dialogue with Dr. Lee. So, Dr. Lee, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be in touch with Toronto, even though I am physically far away and it's 5:30 in the morning here. You asked me if this is the time I get up normally or whether this is for ITA. And the answer is yes to both. This is the time I get up, and I am doing this because ITA invited me, and I am always very happy whenever I have a chance to touch base with Toronto, and to particularly today to have a chat with educators, parents, all people related to education in their own way around this topic, equity and so forth. And when you said that you hope that people will put their questions, I am expecting that you will have questions and comments, because I'm looking forward to a dialogue, and I'm not given yet to talking to myself. It hasn't come to that yet. So I am looking forward to talking with you. Yes. So where shall we begin?
So look, you said you get up at 4:30 in the morning. Actually, you said at 4:30 in the morning, but you said that's always been part of of what you've done since you were a child.
Right. I was very shall we say, I liked doing my homework at 4:30 in the morning, much to my mother's distress, when she said, "Why are you waiting until this hour?" And I would say, that is when it came to me. And she said, "I wish it would come to you earlier." Anyway, but that habit has persisted. And so it has put me in good stead with this conversation that I'm up. And I know it's not 5:30 in Toronto, but it is that here. I actually do quite a few webinars at this time because I'm working with teachers on the East Coast, and they're in classrooms, so I just get up. It's not hard. So this is good. Yeah.
This is part of the routine, and I know your work and has taken you around the globe, but I know specifically here in North America, the U.S. and the Caribbean, and so I'm very curious about your perspective about what has this crisis taught us about the role of public schools in society. I mean, we're seeing that COVID-19 isn't treating all communities equally. We're seeing that how all of the different things that you've written about in your writing around how income supports, the housing, social services, access to food, all of those things have now been compounded with COVID-19 in many communities around the globe, and specifically here in, both the North US and Canada, in the Black community. I'm curious, what has this taught us about the role of public schools in society?
So you've asked me about what I've learned or what we're learning about the role of public schools and in this time. And I like to base my learning on what teachers tell me. The way I work still is that teachers phone me up whenever they want to ask me anything about anything I've said or anything they're working on. And that has often been a source of my learning. So just based on the calls that I've had in the last 4 weeks or so with teachers in different places, and also from looking at what's happening in Canada, because I have been checking to see how the Canadian situation is similar or different from what I run into often based in California, but also doing work in Washington, DC, and so forth. One thing that strikes me is how much we see public schools as the places where real learning takes place. That's a concept, that's an idea that comes across. For instance, when I'm talking with teachers who call me up about distance learning that's not going smoothly, they say to me, I don't think those children are learning anything because the computers are not working and we're not there. But what that makes me think about is how, generally speaking, we see that real learning is connected with schools, with public schools. And actually, when teachers say that to me, that they're not learning, I ask them to use this as an opportunity to reclaim the concept of learning, because learning is going on everywhere, every day, through all the things that are happening with COVID. Students are learning. The question is, what are they learning? And how might we use that in our formal curriculum? So that's the first thing about learning has to do with us. We are expected, our role as public school people, it's to ensure that real learning takes place. The other thing that's very common and very clear as I do this work is that public schools are expected to educate all children, and with emphasis on the all being special needs, second language learners, African Canadian, African American, Indigenous, Asian, all. We have in our laps all students. And when teachers call me, it really reflects that variety of experiences that they face. We have it in our laps to do that. And then particularly related to the United States, I'm not quite sure if this is exactly the case in Canada, but I've seen how public schools under the COVID-19, we're responsible not only for formal learning and for everyone, but we're responsible for meals in many cases, meals, eating, food for children. There was one that I noted that 31 million children in the United States eat lunches at school, and 22 million of them are free and reduced lunch. And that has implications for class and race. And with schools closing, the question became, how would some of those children get the lunch? And schools had to figure out ways of getting lunches to kids, even though the kids were not there. So, I'm not suggesting that that's necessarily the pattern in Canada, but it really struck me that the nutrition is a part of what public schools are expected to address. And then two other very quick observations: issues of safety. One of the things we have had here are numbers that suggest that for some children, the public school is still the safest place they can be, as opposed to being at home, where some children, and I'm stressing some because I know this is not in every case, and thank goodness it isn't, some students are experiencing, violence, unsafe conditions, and so forth. And the perhaps thing that's been reinforced finally is the way in which public schools really must rely on families to do the work that we're supposed to do. If we were under any illusion that this was all about us as teachers, this COVID-19 tells us that if we cannot relate in equitable and respectful and culturally responsive ways to families, we are lost. So those are things that I wouldn't say I've learned them, but they've been brought to my attention very forcefully from the conversations I've had with teachers who hook me up mostly about distance learning. So that's my first take on that. And I would be very happy to hear what other when panelists come on of what they're learning from all of this. But those are my answers, Nigel, off the bat.
And so thank you for that. I mean, and there are some similarities that we know that the TDSB is also working on bring food out to folks. They're trying to, they're distributing technology. We have also Sandra. Thank you for joining us. We really, I know some of the work that you've been doing around health and wellness also has been so crucial. I'm just wondering if you might be able to kind of share with us some of the context that you feel have been going on around how the board has been doing, just to give Enid a little bit of context around the health and wellness being piece here in Canada. I'm just going to get you unmuted in just a second here. Just 1 second here. Can we get her unmuted? I think you are. Away you go.
Thank you. I, however, am not at all involved with what the schools are doing. I'm just reading and being a bystander in this process that we are all going through. And I do know that it has been difficult for many teachers and students, but I'm impressed with how people have rallied and tried to figure out how to get all of this done in what appears to be an enormously short space of time. So I can't add any more except to echo my good friend Enid, who to me is the epitome of all things amazing around kids and schools. So I wanted just to hear her take on things, but
thank you.
I haven't been in a school. I was in one just before it closed, and I have no input in that, unfortunately.
Danielle, your grade 7-8 students, what's going on with them? Maybe we could give how are they doing their mental and wellness and well-being? We'll get you unmuted in just a second there, Danielle.
Yeah, I think for me that's been my biggest concern. I think we all know how much well-being is tied to achievement, and I feel like a lot of times we put the emphasis in the wrong place, where we're focused so much on math and language, but forgetting about that mental health piece. So I mean, my whole thing has been to try and connect with students and really just find out how they're doing, because I think to me that's the most important thing, just check-ins and what have you.
Mm-hmm. Enid, what do you think?
Yes, I hear that question a lot. And the teachers I speak with talk about some of the challenges in doing just that, the checking in. And I have a couple of suggestions for them. They tell me sometimes that when they call home, before they have a chance to talk about the health and wellness, the parents say, oh, they have finished this worksheet, they have done this math, they have done a number, they respond in terms of the academic, because that's what, as you rightly say, people have been putting emphasis on. And so they have a hard time getting, well, how exactly is the child? How are the children, right? And so what I've said, take two things from that. We have to find ways of linking the social, emotional wellness and the academic. In fact, it's a mistake in my view that we have separated them so distinctly. And so a piece of what has to happen as we rethink this work is how building the relationship for strength and health, wellness, and so forth is directly concerned with doing well academically. And so sometimes I practice with those teachers sentence starters we can use to get into the health and wellness piece and move to the academic, So when parents you know, answer, say, oh, they've finished the work, they've finished 3 pages of the worksheet, they've whatever. And a question to ask after you've heard that, if that's what they start with, is to say, so tell me, what do you think they got out of it? What did they learn? What did they enjoy? What piece of it surprised them? And even if the parents can't answer, the students can. So what I'm saying is that this gives us an opportunity to link health and wellness and learning. Too often, as you said, the dichotomy has been, how do we do these scores, right? How do we get these scores up? And particularly here, that's the case. So I say, this is a chance to bring them together. So don't even ask sometimes, what work did you do? Let's just talk about what you learned, what you enjoy, what did you see new, what surprised you, and then use that information to link it with what you're trying to teach. In fact, one of the, I think, important equity issues is to change this notion that the only kind of learning or knowledge comes from schools. We need to push away those walls of school, open families, communities, and their knowledge and experience, and link it with what they do. And this is particularly true for families where people have thought that parents are not interested in education. One of the things I hear sometimes is parents of African descent, African-American parents, they're not interested in education. Maybe they don't say that anymore, but I used to hear that when I did my work in Canada. I hear it here now. And so one of the things I make an argument for, no, let's let that aside. Let us look at what the children are learning from being at home, what parents are helping students to get. Let us look at the assets. Let us look at the strengths. Let us look at the things they are accomplishing under these difficult circumstances. Because actually, when my teachers call me about whatever, I say, let us start with what you have been successful with under these difficult times. And I do Zoom meetings with them. And sometimes I look at their faces as they try to think about what has been successful, because they have got such a direct message of, it's not going well, we're not doing enough. And so I encourage them to start with that, because actually equity work is recapturing and rebuilding the assets, the things that have been ignored amongst people who have not thought to have had them. And those often include Black people, Asian people, people of working class background, and so forth. So that's how I do the health and wellness piece. And usually when I'm working with them, I start with their health and wellness. They come to me with questions about academics. I say, okay, let's just talk about how you're feeling. Let's just talk about what you are learning. Let's just talk about what you're doing. And then we get to it. And I usually round it off by saying, every example you have given me can be linked to some curriculum standard. So I work from what is learned to what they say we need to be learning. We have the Common Core standards here. And I usually say to people, the standards are only common. They're only called Common Core because they are commonly held by all of us. That's only why they're common. They're not common by some, academic making it up. They're common because they have to do with the things we need to learn and teach. So that's been my approach. And it has helped. They come back next time looking less distressed and have greater access to the families. Because I always want, when they tell me they try things, I said, and what was the result? Because as you know, in education, we often describe what we have done. And we need to ask, so what? What have you noticed? Who has it made a difference for? Which children who are on the margins have been brought in terms of language, in terms of sexuality, in terms of race, and so forth. So that's kind of my thinking on that subject.
Right.
And we're using COVID to do that. Yeah.
We're very honored actually this morning to have Zanana Akanda join us here this morning. And I think Aita Sadhu is also jumped in here on our fireside chat. Where I'm going to bring you both in here just a second. But Dr. Lee, you did touch on a couple of subjects that are quite sensitive here in Canada. I will admit, the standardized testing piece, and just wanted to kind of get your your take on, because there's so much pressure, so much resources, so much time that is spent on standardized testing. I mean, obviously, I think most jurisdictions have canceled most of them for this year, at least at the elementary panel. What's your opinion?
Well, two things that strike me. When I look at this country that was so determined to leave no child untested, you know that they, and then when I think about the slow pace we're engaging with testing for COVID, for Corona. I'm sure you followed that. That's a big issue that we've said here. We've left no child untested. But when it comes to the testing that counts, like making sure we know who has it, who has had it, and can do it, we're dragging our feet. So that's my sort of tongue-in-cheek comment about that. In terms of standardized testing, as you know, we went through here, No Child Left Behind and all of that. And it seems to me that a piece of what has begun to happen, and we have to make sure that we do it there. We have to reclaim the notion of assessment and not leave it just to be whatever is produced from standardized tests. There are multiple ways of students demonstrating what they have learned, what they know, yes. And all the work that we can do to push for that is what I think needs to happen, because we get a very narrow band of what counts as knowledge in standardized tests. And we have paid the price for it here. This is why when the teachers say to me, only learning, the only learning is what counts from schools and so forth. That's why I push it and say, let's look at what they have learned in general. Let us look at what they're learning. Somebody talked to me about, last week was Poetry Week in here, that was part of the curriculum. And so this teacher was talking to me, said, because she's been taking this approach, what have you learned? What have you enjoyed? The child's response was, actually, I wrote this poem about a tree, which was outside here, and I probably would not have seen it if I hadn't been home, if I hadn't been under, the quarantine, and the mother got involved in it. So I clearly think standardized tests provide a very limited sense of what is learned. And the process we have to engage in is maximizing the number of different ways in which assessment takes place, because we are missing what children are learning many of the times by doing narrow standardized testing. And it is clearly linked to an economic question, as you know, the test producers and so forth. That's a piece of it.
Right. And then linking the other piece that you brought, also I'd like to trouble you with a little bit is the homeschooling piece and what that looks like at home, right? So, because at least here in the Toronto context, we've got superintendents that are desperately trying to recreate what happens in the classroom in people's homes, and there's this incredible pressure on teachers like Danielle and throughout our board and in the province to recreate what's actually what's happening in the classroom in someone's home, when in a teacher's home, for instance, they're also dealing with COVID, right? They've got they've got a little one that they might have their own little children that they're taking care of. They might have their elderly parents that they're taking care of, and there's also this push to be on video, for instance, with the students, and because there's at home, we can't control how many devices folks have. We can't control the speed of their internet, right? But yet we still have the school board pushing to recreate what's happening at the school. What are some tips that you might have, for instance, for parents and for teachers to deal with that tension?
Yeah. So one of the things that COVID-19 has revealed is the ongoing inequality in terms of access, the access to computers, to Chromebooks, to those things, right? It's laid it bare, because some families, there are enough computers, so if there are 3 people in the house, they have their own. I've talked with teachers who are saying there's one, the parent has to use it for the work that they're doing because they are quarantined and they have to work at home. And then the 2 or 3 children who both have to do it. So pointing out what that inequality is in terms of the digital divide is one thing that we need to do, is not pretend like everybody's got the same thing, you know, to work with. That's clear. Nor does everybody have the same space and time and so forth. So it is unequal. And because it is unequal, we have to differentiate what we are doing. We talk about differentiation in instruction, but we have to talk about differentiation in distribution of resources and in the different kind of resources, with some people needing more than others, and also the way in which we introduce those resources. I've had a conversation last week with somebody who said, well, you know, they're just pushing these technological tools, the Chromebooks and so. You use Chromebooks? Is that what you call them in Toronto? Yeah, we use Chromebooks. Yes. We're pushing the Chromebooks on the families, and they don't want them. You know, they just want paper and pencil. Well, I said, hold on. First of all, before we make that assumption, let us find out what it is that the parents actually would like. And if they, you know, so we are appropriate in terms of what people's needs are. And if we're going to be introducing the Chromebooks, which I think they have a right to them, let us look at how we do it. Because part of why some people are rejecting it is because the way in which it's introduced, the way in which they're taught to use it, it emphasizes their lack of knowledge. You know, it is done in a very disrespectful way. It doesn't honor what they know before, right? And so that's a piece of it. That's why they say we don't want it, because if you're going to be made to feel foolish, if you're going to be talked to as if you have no sense because you don't know how to use this particular tool, of course you don't want it. So I want to look at those pieces there, that it is both honoring what people know, differentiating the distribution and the type of things we use if we are to get the results that we want. And it shouldn't be recreating what's going on in classrooms. We should be asking, what is it that we are trying to accomplish in terms of learning? That should be the goal. And then we work back from there, dealing with various kinds of inequalities, differences, and assets that families have to work on this. This would be my approach. That's what I recommend to the teachers who speak with me. And always I say to them, and how did it work? Because I never like to give recommendations, just leave it. I like to say, so what happened last time you tried it? And they know that. And because we need that in education. We don't publicize enough of what we have observed when we have tried to address equity issues. We kind of just say we've done it. And my question is, so what? Anyway, there are others who want to get in, and I promised I wasn't going to talk for the full length of this time. I want to hear what other folks have to say.
Zanana Akanda is I mean, I know the two of you know each other well, and is a former legislator here in Ontario, a former school principal, and an educator. Zanana, it would be wonderful to maybe you could share some of your insight of COVID-19 here in Ontario, and how you see how well the province has, the province has been handling it, what you might be, your reflections on the public school here in Ontario, and you know, and some of the comments that Dr. Lee has already been made. So, and welcome with us this morning. Thank you.
No, thank you. It's nice to hear you, Enid.
You too.
I really do think that for so very long, we have not valued what the children bring to the school. We collect them into sections, you know, the middle class and what they bring, and the poor and the immigrants and what they bring or do not bring. And our expectations are geared to that too. And the fact that they live in solid communities where there isn't much interaction between the classes really does affect our thinking. The unfortunate thing about that is that we don't value what the poorer children or the children in inner cities, you know, we have all kinds of euphemisms for these areas, what they bring to the school. I always used to say to my teachers, you know, it's fine to say that it's not fine, rather, to say that these children don't know anything. If you put middle-class children in the middle of these circumstances, they would be absolutely stunned. they wouldn't survive. There is something that the other children have, a sense of reality, a sense of danger. They can be sent to the store around the corner and down the street because they know how to get back. Middle class kids don't know that. They're driven to the school and they're leaving. So what happens with COVID is that all of a sudden these kids are at home. And their parents, these kids in the inner city schools, their parents also think of them as not knowing, not valuing what they do know, because it isn't what it's not what the school values. So if the school gives them 99 in math, that's great. But if they get 52 in math, the parents' thinking is influenced by that. And so our kids aren't bright, And I say to them, your kids are bright. They don't see the value of just adding two numbers together. So here they're at home. Their parents haven't had a great deal of education sometimes. And they're wondering, what do I do with them? What do I do? How do I take care of them? Or who's going to take care of them? So that, and you say to them when you're speaking to them, well, what are they learning while they're at home? And they say, well, I'm not a teacher. Everybody pulls themselves out of that situation. I'm not a teacher. I don't know. I only went to grade whatever. I quit school at 16. And you get all of these excuses. And you say to them, there are all kinds of things that they can be learning that don't come off that page that I'm sending you. The pages that the school board's sending to those teachers to send to the pupils and to work with are just a way of they're justifying the fact that we still are connecting with the kids, but they're not valuing what the kids already know. And they do it in such a way that schools are still seen and will always be seen as the arbiters of who's bright and who's not. And so COVID, they don't recognize any kind of regular knowledge. And so COVID is just another way for them to do that. It's just another way for the schools to say, well, I've got the most difficult kids. They're in this inner city and they don't know anything, and their parents aren't teaching them. And so what am I going to do? And here we go again. The sheets on the paper, the marks that the school gives them define who the child is. And so what you're saying is very interesting to me, because it's just another way to say to the parents, you know a great deal of things. You've survived. You've survived where many other kids brought from the middle class would not survive. You know how to do these things, and they don't see it as, they don't value it themselves, so they don't teach it to their kids. The kids pick it up.
Yeah. And just to say that, to make it more concrete with those teachers, I told them that I am making a list of all the things I am learning from COVID, during COVID-19, that I'm learning in the process of getting through it. I've asked them to make a list of those things, and when they get to families and so forth, find out what it is that children have learned too, and adding that to the curriculum piece of what is, part of this experience. The other quick thing I want to say just about content that I think specifically speaks to our communities. There is so much about the impact of COVID-19 that is race related. I do not know what the statistics are in Canada, but I'm sure you have heard that the percentage of people who have died from COVID-19 disproportionately African Americans. Now, what I want to get at here is that when we think about what is learned in school, and this is a chance for us to look at how we help students from various backgrounds. In fact, we help all students find out how race plays a part in the information that we collect in the lives we experience, who's on the front line doing the protection work in hospitals, I'm talking about here, and I think in Toronto too, and so forth. So how can we make the content of curriculum much more relevant, much more critical in the understanding, and students can see themselves in it? And I'm not talking about data that reflects only the disasters that hit us, but we need to do that, but also the strengths, the mutual aid societies that are working in the Black communities to help with this situation. Like what, you know, how are we helping each other? How are we addressing it? And part of what I think COVID-19 should allow us to do is collect race-based statistics, both in terms of the input and the outcome, because I know from my years of work in Canada, it has not always been the easiest way to name who needs to be named in what is happening, in terms of access to things, in terms of assets that people have that don't get named, and so forth. So I just want to say that COVID-19 is exposing that. I mean, you probably know, for instance, the statistic from Louisiana, 33% of the people who live in Louisiana are African-American, and 70% of the people who have died from COVID-19 are African-American. So I'm just saying there's a lot of race-based pieces of content knowledge that people should be thinking about, that we should encourage our communities to think about and ask, what are the implications for us as a community in Canada, in Toronto, in Nova Scotia, and so forth. That's one other piece about, you know, what COVID is pointing us to. And just also very, very generally to remember that knowing, oh, the other piece, yes, this one struck me. As I look every day at television and see the range of experts, the range of doctors, professors, Harvard, Yale, all over the place, Stanford, who are African-American, who have knowledge about the condition of COVID, who are in public health. And I ask myself, we have this knowledge within our community, and yet in some ways, our community's lives span and life is not reflecting that knowledge, you know. And I'm not suggesting that because you're an African-American, African-Canadian professor or doctor or public health person, that it is entirely your responsibility to see that Black people don't die. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm saying there is something not working where the things that we know and can do, they are not getting directly applied to our own folk, to our own community. The gap is too big. The knowledge is there and somehow we're not connected. So I wanted to bring that up because it's on my mind and I notice it. I mean, there is no shortage of African-American experts on this question. And then when you look at the numbers, you think, oh, why is it not working its way into the community? What do we need to do differently? And I say we, because I know from my days in North York that survival in any white institution is directly linked to your connection with the community.
Thank you.
That you come from. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Part of the challenge that we have here, Dr. Lee, is just that we don't collect race-based statistics. And so it's hard for, you know, the health department to know, to confirm what we know in our bones is that there's a disproportionate effect that COVID is having. You know, while the Toronto District School Board has been doing a better job than most other boards of collecting race-based statistics, it's still not done, you know, countrywide. So those are also difficult questions for us to answer here in Canada, and you there in the States have actually set a good example for us. Now, you know,
can I just say a quick thing about making sure that just even in this, that if we're looking to have the Chromebooks used, find out who has them and who doesn't have them, and not behave as if everybody has access to internet. And if they don't have it, figure out what we're going to do as a system to get them that, or have another arrangement. Because this generalized, oh yes, we just make sure that everybody gets taken care of, when in fact we know it's not the case. One of the things a teacher said to me that she's noticing is that with the distance learning and the challenges of distance learning, other teachers are saying to her, you know what, the students who are already strong, let's just keep going with them, and those who can't make it, they just have to fall behind, and that's how it is. you know, and I said to her, this is the time to really hone in and making sure that that is not just how it is. And we ask ourselves, what do we need to do differently? Anyway, and other people may have things they want to say, but I just wanted to mention those few points.
Danielle, Danielle, in your, what are you hearing from the parents of your grade 7-8 classroom? I mean, what I'm around the board, we're here. I see a continuum of responses from parents, right? So we're seeing that, we're hearing some parents that are saying, you know, you're not giving me enough work for my child, right? I want more work for my child. And then we've got the other side of the continuum that is saying, leave me alone. It's a pandemic. I don't have time for this, right? So how are you, as Danielle, as a school teacher, and you and your colleagues, how are you trying to like navigate that continuum?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I do have to say, first of all, that I've been pretty impressed with the way our school board has been managing the rollout of technology to students who don't have. I think they've done a good job of, you know, finding out who doesn't have and who doesn't have access and providing them with internet-enabled devices. So I've appreciated that very much. Certainly it's not finished, it's still in progress. But in terms of the management of, you know, figuring out that balance between how much work to give and what to focus on, yeah, it's been a challenge. Every family is dealing with this in a different way. We've got families whose parents are impacted because they're frontline workers and can't be in the homes. And we've got the other end of the spectrum where parents are in the homes and do want, you know, more work, where that connection with your community comes into play. You have to be having those conversations with parents and make sure that you're being responsive to the needs of whatever your community is. And I think from a parent standpoint, I've got kids in grade 7 and I've got kids in, I've been really great in terms of, I guess, being less strict with the amount of work that they're giving and I guess the deadlines and that kind of thing. The focus has really been on giving feedback to students, rich feedback to students. And I like that, as opposed to focusing on evaluation and assessment. So I've loved that. For my high schoolers, on the other hand, I think it's been business as usual. And I have not appreciated that from a parent standpoint. There hasn't been a lot of questioning, you know, the wellness or the mental health of my kids. They've just gone right back into curriculum. My high schoolers are doing tests that are time-based. They have an hour to finish this test. And I just think that's kind of ridiculous in the midst of a pandemic, providing those like classroom structure, which has not worked for students in the past. And we're expecting that to work now in homes. It's been interesting from both standpoints.
Just before you go, Dr. Lee, Tracy, are you still with us? Thank you very much, Danielle. That was the kind of lens we needed to open up trouble at. Tracy, are you with us also? Because I know that you're another school teacher that also could share or build on what Danielle had shared with us. Trace, TDSB teacher Tracy Halliday, are you there? We have to unmute her, please. Can we unmute Tracy? Okay. Tracy, you there?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Sorry about that. Yes, so I teach grade 4 for the Toronto District School Board as well. I found that throughout this time that I've really had to be very flexible on both my students, parents, and myself. Just to expand on that, in terms of like even just scheduling the work, I noticed that with families, everybody's different. So a lot of my students, some of them at first, I started with one subject per day, and that didn't work. And then I was like, okay, I'll put the workout on the Monday, you do it when you can. But then for my students who are more independent, that need more structure, they're like, Miss Halliday, this doesn't work for us either. So I gave them a little bit of structure. So I found throughout this time is really in terms of flexibility. We're in that September mode, I find, where we really need to learn more about our students, connect with them, and build those relationships so that we can, you know, make sure we're hitting their interests and work for their students. We're in a career that's a service-based student. So we are, you know, really trying to make sure that things work for our students. So flexibility has been really key for me.
Yeah. And may I just jump in with both of those comments. The teachers I have who call me, they describe exactly those same responses in terms of the range of different responses from families. And I say to them, we in education are the, shall we say, the architects of differentiation. And one, you know, everybody talks about differentiation in terms of instruction. I want us to take differentiation in terms of family relationships. I want us to take differentiation in terms of assessment and so forth. And you would say, but Enid, how are we going to do this? How will this be done? So one of the things I suggest is say, look for patterns amongst the families. So you could say 4 of these seem to want more of the time. In fact, one teacher said to me that some parents say, you are calling me too often. I have work to do. This is like a pandemic, you know, and others say you're not calling enough. And, you know, flexibility and the underlying principle of equity is how you reach everyone. That is really what we're talking about, regardless of their rank or their class or whatever. That is the goal. And because we know there is a tendency that those who know the system better, they have a better chance of telling us what they need, and they have a better chance of getting it. You know, they know how to call the district, to send you a letter to let you know. And so a piece of keeping the vision of inclusiveness in our work is to ask, how can I hear from the people who don't think they have a right to tell me how it's working? Because those are the very people sometimes who most need us to adjust what we are doing. And that way we can.
And if I could also add just one more thing as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've also had to let down my guard as the expert in the classroom as well. I've noticed that right now I am right at the same level as my students. I'm learning from them sometimes. Sometimes they're like, Miss Howday, no, you need to click here, you need to do that. And I have to just look at my privilege and my ego and just put that aside and be like, okay, yes, please teach me what to do, because everybody's seeing that I'm struggling. So they have been in a lot of moments my teachers. I've learned so much from them during this time that we're in, and I'm very much grateful because I know that I can be a better teacher for them once I start listening to them. So I've had to let down my guard as the expert in the classroom.
And just to connect it with that, you can even go further, make a list of all the things you are learning during COVID-19. Have a curriculum based on your knowledge of that, you know, and I have my list. And one of the things that does, even in terms of families, even in terms of kids thinking the only place you learn is schools, you say no, or the only place you learn from a teacher, no. We learn from all places. When something new comes into our minds, where we get a new understanding, especially of something old, then we know learning has taken place. In fact, just to say something that I said that COVID-19 is teaching us lessons about equity and social justice, or the lack thereof. COVID-19 is also giving us an opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. And that's a line from Sonia Renee Taylor's poem. I used it the other day when I was working with some folks across the country, with Mississippi, Minnesota, and I said, that is what this allows us to do. You know, and there's a lot that we have lost. There's a lot we're losing in terms of people dying. I mean, Thursday last week, when the rate of the number of persons who died in California on Thursday alone was 115 people, right? That was just California. Never mind in New York, it's by the 500. I'm just saying that kind of thing, I know, is hard for children. I hope you don't have those. I know you don't have those numbers in Canada, but I want to just point that while a lot is changing, there's also a great deal that's a loss when people, you know, died. A 6-year-old who was in one of our schools who was, died. And some of the children we are talking about are going to have that experience. I hope not to the numbers we have here. And that is why this whole garment that we can stitch, it takes all of them into account, all of their spirit, their feelings, their intelligence, their ambitions, their creativity, all of them. Special needs, black, brown, white, poor, rich, in between. That is what this gives us a chance to do.
Aita's also on the line with us, and just my sister who's been pulling this all together. Aita, what do you think? This stitch a new garment. I'm like, exactly.
I am loving it. I'm actually, the first thing that I want to say, and this is fantastic. This is fantastic. What I want to say is my mother is 87. She's probably having a hard Black woman's hair day kind of thing going on. There she is for a tiny second. There you go, right? But the whole time that you're talking, this is what my mother is saying. Change must come. Change. She's having her own protest going on next to me. You must tell them change must come. But here's the thing. This is what I am encouraged by. So I don't want to use the word excited. So this is what I'm encouraged by. I am encouraged that we also don't have to ask for permission to do a whole lot of things. I'm encouraged with the fact that we can have Afrocentric curriculum and it can be on platforms of 1 billion people. I'm excited about that. You don't have to go to no board and no trustee office and explain we need to do this. Now we have technology. I love the fact that, Trisha, you talked about, this brings me on a level playing field with my students. It reminds me of people who play in a steel band. You could be a banker in risk management in 200, and you could be a student who is 12, and you're playing in the same instrument. So I think when Trisha said that, I saw the campaign that we must run for our children to let them know that COVID in a kind of way, and Dom Simpson, who is over there too on this call too, he made me, something he said the other day that made me think about this. And this is where we are powerful. This is middle passage for us. And it is middle passage in that we can say to our children, you have the ability to make up a whole new world. Like, how cool is that? I mean, we meet each other and we meet Black people and you just start dreaming. And children, imagine purple cows. So here's the thing now. We are inviting you as part of all the learning, the schooling, the whatever, to help us make up a new world. I think if I tell Black children that, they're really excited because now I'm also opening another space where they're thinking, oh my God, I got the ability. And guess what? A lot of people are dying now, and a lot of people have died in our history. And here are the parallels. But what we do know, people who have come from multiple languages and had to learn new languages and create a whole new world. Here's another opportunity that we can do this. And what the world knows is this: we don't leave people behind. We've taken everybody along with us in all our movements of civil rights. Everybody just moves along with our movements. So here's a wonderful time that I think that when we get those campaign going with our propaganda and our proper propaganda, I think that this is a time for that opportunity. And Enid, brilliant in terms of saying to people, record. What have we learned in this period? The dialogue with parents. But I'm talking to the choir here. But every day I feel more liberated in that this gives us the opportunity not to ask anybody permission to do 600 things in our checklist that we want to do, but that we can freely now do it because the technology allows us to do that. So that's just me. That is just me and all of this, that I see the possibilities, and to know that the Caribbean, which was an experiment, exists, and their nationhoods, and people went through independence. And so here we are now faced in a moment in history to go through those same type of revolutions and movements. Educators, oh my God, it's an awesome moment for you.
Yes, stitch a new garment, build a new world.
Right.
Zanana, I gotta ask you questions, Zanana, and then I'm gonna throw it over to Enid Lee. maybe to kind of wrap us up and to put a little bow on it, okay? So Zanana, can you tell me when we reopen our schools, okay? You know, and obviously you've been in the halls of power before, so you know what levers they have. When we reopen the schools, what kind of education will we demand, right? You know, we've heard about we got to stitch a new garment. We know that we can ask our children to help us build a new world. But Zina, you know, when we reopen, what kind of education will we demand? I think can we unmute Zanana?
I think it's important for us when we start our schools again, first of all, to ask the students what they were doing and what they learned while they were at home and how they helped out the situation. But what are we going to demand? We're going to demand that we recognize that the children don't come to us like blank sheets. Each of them has knowledge of things that we're not even aware of. We're going to demand also that we recognize that they're all intelligent. I get very tired of going to meetings, and you know I go to millions, where their expectations for the poor and for I would say the poor and children of our race are somehow less than. And they impart that to the students in very basic ways in terms of the work they supply for them and how they go about it. There are even schools, you know, in this city that have the regular curriculum, and then they have the school-based curriculum for some of those schools in secondary. So we're going to demand that our children are expected to do the best. We're going to demand also that all the children have a curriculum which values each other. You know, I find that the curriculum nowadays is so focused on learning things that we forget to think that those things are helpful to other people and that we share that attitude. And I find that lacking somehow. And there are good things though that they do know. And but that's one of the things that I think it's important. And I think that we have to find better ways of evaluating students' performance and encouraging it. And so we're going to demand that the teachers and the principals and people in the schools recognize that their expectations for our kids are the same as other people's expectations. We want them to know things, we want them to value people, we want them to move on, and we want them to believe that they as individuals are capable of doing things and of contributing to the society. I mean, it was always emphasized when we went to school about our contributions to the society. And many of these great people came out of the public school system. And so we want them to realize that you're part of this contribution and you must carry that weight. There's no point learning things if they aren't of value to the individuals who are demonstrating them and of value to the people in the society in general. And when you talk like that, they say, but what about the curriculum? And I say, well, the curriculum can be there isn't anything in the curriculum that can't be focused around the needs of people. That's the kind of schools we're going to do.
Thank you for that. So Enid, we only have a couple of minutes left. Maybe you could wrap this up for us and put a little bow on it. And what are we going to demand when the schools reopen?
So as I was listening, I was thinking about the 6 R's that I've been talking about with people in presentations I've done lately around COVID. And I go back to that vision of the weaving a new garment that includes all of humanity and all of nature. So that includes all of the state of the earth and so forth. These are the 6 things, linking with what Zanana said, and also what was offered by others here. Upon return, the recognition, that's the first part, recognition of the learning that has taken place by students, by teachers, what families have contributed. So, because so often there are things that need to be recognized that are not, people who need to be recognized on what they've had to offer. So we're going to be making sure that we embrace and find out, especially from those people who are on the margins, what it is that they have learned, and recognize that, and recognize it to the extent that we want to include it in what we continue to learn. So it isn't that, oh, you just did that, during the time off, and now we are getting on with real business. The curriculum, broadly and accurately defined, is as follows. A curriculum has to do with all of the experiences that a school provides for students, and of course that they include. So this can be part of it. So recognition is definitely one. I want to talk about also another R is respect for the families, for the various differences and so forth that are part of our communities, right? And by respect, I'm meaning being able to see what is valuable in what their strengths are. Next one, resources. And I cannot let this go, because if we want schools to function in different ways, the funding has to be put in place in the right places with the proper advice to make sure that our teachers or students or families have what. Some part of the pandemic has to do here in the United States, and I'm not saying this is what happened in Canada, but it is the lack of preparation of infrastructure that has led to this. And so we have to run schools as though we know another pandemic is coming, and prepare accordingly with resources, with infrastructure, with opportunities for teachers to do the distance learning, not on the fly, but to have that support, to have that time for it. And then, of course, I'm looking for representation, where the things I talked about of what the curriculum is about, those things that Ita said are on all the platforms and so forth. It's not just that we know them, but actually what is it we know, and who are we knowing about, and how are we learning it, and what are the pieces that are missing. So representation, the curriculum. And then our rights, the rights to have these things. And the difference for me is that we treat something as a right, we treat it definitely differently than if we think it's a favor, right? If it's a favor, there is a patronizing and paternalistic and attitude that says, I'll let you have it if I like today and maybe not tomorrow. By right, I'm talking about something that is what you should expect, that is what is yours, and that is what you deserve as a member of the community, as a Canadian, a person living in Canada, person who's lived in Canada before Canada was Canada, all of that. So rights. And then the last one I added, because teachers have been so worn out. One of the things I'm asking for is rest. Because our teachers, I see it, so having a chance for reasonable engagement and opportunity for rest. I look at the way in which how so many things have been canceled for such a long time. It's almost as if people say, oh my goodness, I'm so glad we don't have to do that. It was so much. So I just want to talk about that balance, that healthy balance that our teachers or administrators or parents or students have to have, so that unlike the people that we have come from, we don't have to work ourselves to death, because that is also the history of Black people and working yourself to death, often worked to death. So I'm talking about balance and health. For me, COVID-19 is no joke. COVID-19 is distressing in days that I have never lived in. Just the number of people in the United States who die every day. You know, when you hear 500 people dying in New York City and they don't know what they're going to do with the bodies, there's no smiling about that. It's a deep message. And also when you think how many of them are Black and people of color and so forth, and people are poor and people are old. That's the other thing, because I'm definitely heading into that category myself, you know? So I have to think of that. And so how all of those things impact you, but also how it makes you say, and here is a chance to do something differently as we enter the post-COVID-19 phase, whenever that is. And we're in it now as we gather the data of what the children are learning, of what we are learning, of the assets of our communities, of the inequalities that have to be addressed. This is our chance for doing it. That's how I'd like to wrap it up and put a bow on it, as you've put it. Thank you.
Just before we leave the second,
Nigel,
Don, welcome, Don.
Just
Oh,
grab
hi, Don. Oh, good to see you. Good to see you.
30 seconds at the end of a wonderful hour. I have written 3 pages of what I have learned today.
Oh.
Enid, I will be happy to share those. I just want to say, as an 85-year-old guy, former teacher, that my mind in COVID has been going back to my childhood, because at age 6, I was living through something very similar. It was World War II. My father was over fighting in the war. We were being bombarded by information that said our world was falling apart and we were not likely going to survive. And we as young students were given big challenges to help the effort. And I hear that popping up. We were respected that we as a 7-year-old could play a role. So I have lots of thoughts about having experienced some of this. We had our quarantines. It was scarlet fever. My biggest fear was polio. And my teacher used polio to teach us about technologies and iron lungings that were being created. But I'm taking more than 30 seconds, but for the rest of you, I want you to know, Enid, who would have thought? I first knew Enid when she was an undergraduate, and then we were apart for 40 years until Ita brought us back together in the People's Residence. So it's been a rare pleasure to be sitting, listening to your wisdom that was sparkling when you were an undergraduate, and I'm so proud of what you've done since, and so happy to have been part of this wonderful learning experience. So thank you, Enid, thank you, Ija, and thank you to the young teachers that I've been listening to with great respect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don, for sharing. Enid, Dr. Lee, I can't tell you how grateful, humbled, and just how many fans you have here in Canada. As Don is probably obviously pointing out, being a long-year fan of yours, we are so grateful. Yeah.
As soon as the border is open, I'll be coming back.
Oh, perfect, perfect.
As soon as the quarantine is over, I'll be back over Toronto. Yes, yes.
Can you remind folks how they can keep in touch with you?
Yes. Should I just give you my email website? How do I do it?
I guess website's the best thing, yeah?
Yes, www.enidlee.com.
Awesome.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
All right,
and
thank you. So glad to be in Toronto. Yes,
that ends us with Breakfast with series. Please visit the A Different Book List Cultural Center website, a Different Book List CC website. Join us on Twitter at ADBCC777, and look out for our future events. Thanks for attending, everyone. Love you. Have a great day.
Thank you.